He drafts, but only Ice Age. He owns a Black Lotus, which he only plays in his casual Cat Tribal deck. His commander is a Tog, but there are no other Atog in his deck. He buys old fat packs, but just for the novels. He is the most interesting Magic player in the world.
I don't always play Legacy, but when I do, I play Deadguy Ale. Keep your mana open, my friends.
Deadguy Ale is a black-white mid-range deck with disruptive elements in the Legacy format. At the core of our deck are the powerful threats Stoneforge Mystic and Dark Confidant. Dark Confidant is a must-answer threat that generates card advantage every turn until he is removed. He provides a steady stream of disruption while also attacking our opponent. Stoneforge Mystic generates card advantage when it comes into play and provides utility in the form of an equipment toolbox. When we are playing against opposing creature decks, we can fetch up Umezawa's Jitte to help our creatures when in combat and kill their smaller creatures. When we are playing against a combo or control deck and need to attack their hand, we can search up a Sword of Feast and Famine. When we are looking to buffer our life total and close the game out quickly, we can search up Batterskull. We supplement our must-answer threats with a variety of disruption. Tidehollow Sculler not only interrupts our opponent's plans, but also applies pressure to their life total. Ideally, we will precede one of our threats with a 1-mana discard spell, such as Inquisition of Kozilek or Thoughtseize. Against combo decks, we can take away their key cards with our efficient disruption, and against interactive decks, we can strip their removal, so our Stoneforge Mystic or Dark Confidant can live to take over the game. When 6 pieces of 1-mana discard and Tidehollow Sculler are not enough to strip our opponent's hand clean, we supplement our disruption further with 2 copies of Collective Brutality. Because we lack tools like Brainstorm to provide card selection, having a card that is flexible, like Collective Brutality, is valuable. When we do not need a discard spell, Brutality can act as a removal spell for format staples such as Deathrite Shaman and Delver of Secrets. Brutality can also help generate tempo against faster decks like Burn or Elves by allowing us to trade 2 cards for 2 other cards for just 2 mana, letting us turn a card we would normally die with in our hand into a useful resource. For removing larger threats, we have 4 copies of Swords to Plowshares. It is hard to beat the efficiency of removing almost any threat for just a single mana. Because our deck is fairly grindy, we do not care about giving our opponent a few extra points of life. Also keep in mind that we can plow our own creatures in a pinch if we need some extra life against an aggressive deck. For troublesome permanents such as opposing planeswalkers or artifacts, we pack a couple copies of Council's Judgment. Because of how voting works, Judgment can take care of even troublesome cards like True Name Nemesis and Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. Should we be playing against an army of little green men or a young pyromancer that has stayed alive too long, we have 2 copies of Toxic Deluge to play cleanup with. We round out our main deck with some grindy threats in Gideon of the Trials, Liliana of the Veil, and Lingering Souls. Gideon of the Trials is a fantastically flexible card. Against other decks with creatures, it can act as a pseudo-removal spell that encourages our opponent to extend into our Toxic Deluge. Against some combo decks, like Storm, Gideon's emblem acts as a form of disruption that our opponent needs to answer before they can combo kill us. Liliana of the Veil is a powerful card. Against fair decks, she is removal that can answer annoying cards like True Name Nemesis. Against combo decks and control decks, Liliana helps grind away their hand while also looming as a threat that can take away half their lands if she goes unchecked for too long. Lingering Souls is a card that plays well with Liliana's +1 and Collective Brutality. The fact that Souls provides multiple bodies for our equipment is also excellent. Souls is one of our best tools against decks with opposing planeswalkers since the bodies it creates are also evasive. The last thing we need to look at in our main deck is the mana base. One of the big upsides to playing a 2-color deck is that we get to play a pile of basic lands. We have 4 basic swamps, 2 basic plains, and 9 fetch lands to let us choose between dual lands and basics depending on what the situation calls for. Having so many basic lands allows us to insulate ourselves against Wasteland while also making Blood Moon poor against us. We supplement our basics and fetches with scrub lands and various utility lands such as Wasteland, Karakas, Horizon Canopy, and Shambling Vent. Unlike the Delver decks in the format that play 4 Wastelands and tend to use them aggressively, we are only playing 2 wastelands. We want to use our wastes as utility cards for killing opposing things like Karakas or Dark Depths. Our deck is fairly mana hungry, so when in doubt, it is often better to save our wastelands as opposed to firing them off aggressively. Karakas is essentially a plains that has both minimal upside and downside. The upside is that it can protect our Thalia post-board against decks like Storm, while also acting as main deck hate for things like Reanimator. The downside is that Karakas does not make white mana under a Blood Moon, and it can die to Wasteland. Horizon Canopy has a more obvious downside in that it deals damage to us when we make mana with it, but it provides a colored mana for us and can draw a new card in the late game when we no longer need the land. Shambling Vent costs us some tempo by coming into play tapped, but the fact that it is a utility land that makes both of our colors makes it worthwhile. Remember, our deck has double black and double white spells it needs to cast, so we need lots of sources of both colors of mana. When it comes to our sideboard, the cards contained there fall into one of 2 categories. Cards that help us grind against other mid-range and control decks, cards that help us lock out combo decks. We have a smattering of different cards to help us grind out opposing control decks from different angles. The first is a second copy of Batterskull. Having a 4th piece of equipment in our deck makes our Stoneforge Mystics better as the game goes long. Batterskull is also a perfectly serviceable card to just draw when we are trying to make the turn count last into the double digits. The best card against mid-range decks like Deadguy Ale is easily Jace the Mind Sculptor. The best way to beat opposing Jaces is to go toe-to-toe with Planeswalkers of our own. Thankfully, we have 2 excellent tools for doing so in Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, and Kaya, Ghost Assassin. Gideon lets us pump out a constant stream of creatures to pressure opposing Planeswalkers nicely. Just be wary of using Gideon's +1 ability against any deck that might have Swords to Plowshares or Terminus in it. Kaya is fairly unique as far as Planeswalkers go, but she's also extremely powerful. Turn she resolves, her -2 generates a 2-for-1 by making them discard a card while also letting us draw a card. The following turn, she can do it again before taking a turn off to do it twice more. Kaya generates 4 cards worth of value every 3 turns, meaning Kaya can outgrind even Jace most games. The last card in our sideboard for fair matchups is an additional copy of Council's Judgment. This is just another catch-all that comes in whenever our opponent has lots of troublesome permanents that we may need to remove. The bulk of the anti-combo cards in our sideboard are pieces of permanent-based disruption. We start with a few cards that Storm has a hard time beating, such as Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, Aethersworn Canonist, and Rest in Peace. The important thing to remember about Thalia is that we only want to board her in against spell-based combo decks. It may seem tempting to board her in against something like Delver, but remember, we have a lot of non-creature spells ourselves, and Thalia is a symmetrical effect. Aethersworn Canonist is not only reasonable against Storm, but is also fine against Elves and decks containing Snapcaster Mage. Remember, Canonist only prevents us from playing 2 non-artifact spells. This means we can play a Tidehollow Sculler in the same turn as something else. Rest in Peace has a lot of application in Legacy. In addition to locking Storm out of Past in Flames kills, it is also fantastic against Dredge, lands, and decks containing Tarmogoyf and Deathrite Shaman. Grafdigger's Cage is similar to Rest in Peace where it is good, but it can also be played on the first turn. Grafdigger's Cage also doubles as hate against Elves since it turns off their copies of Green Sun, Zenith, and Natural Order. The last card in our sideboard is one of the more powerful tools we have in Legacy, Surgical Extraction. In addition to being good against the graveyard decks in Legacy such as Reanimator and Dredge, Surgical Extraction is also fantastic against combo decks like Storm and Sneak and Show. This is because we can pair Surgical Extraction with our discard spells to rip important components out of our opponent's decks. For example, if we take all of the Infernal Tutors out of Storm, they will have a hard time generating enough Storm count and finding the cards they need to go off. Against Sneak and Show, if we take out all of their Sneak attacks, we can generally handle their Show Intels via Karakas and Liliana of the Veil. Another useful interaction with Surgical Extraction is that it shuffles our opponent's deck. While this is minimal on the surface, something that happens fairly often is our opponent casting Brainstorm to hide important cards on top of their deck in response to a discard spell. We can then use Surgical Extraction to shuffle away whatever they hid after taking the remaining best card in their hand. If you're looking to play a mid-range interactive deck and are not looking to be bound to playing the usual suspects of Brainstorm and Deathrite Shaman, then Deadguy Ale is likely the deck for you.
And this program was made possible thanks to a sponsorship from Card Kingdom, as well as the Patreon support of viewers such as you. So thank you.